Torrington bearing with the inner race facing down. Then install that input sprag. You will need to spline the overrun and forward clutch plates to the hub and outer race of the sprag assembly. If you're having a problem with this, try using a pair of snap ring pliers. They work great for this. You'll know it's all the way down when the inner race lays against the top of the Torrington bearing. Next, install the forward clutch pressure plate with the beveled side facing up, then the snap ring. After the snap ring is in place, you'll need to check that clutch pack clearance. Using a filler gauge, slide it between the snap ring and pressure plate. To adjust this clearance, you will need to change the pressure plate. It is selective. Next, install the 3/4 ply plate. Now install the legs of the plate over the fingers of the 3/4 clutch apply ring. Install a friction plate and then a steel plate. Notice the small and big teeth on the steel plate. The small teeth slide in this groove notched here in the input drum housing. Then alternate clutch and steel. After you have installed all the friction and steel plates, then install the 5 3/4 load springs. Now slide the springs in between the small teeth with the open end of the spring cage facing up. Then install the 3/4 pressure plate with the bevel side up. Install the snap ring. Now to measure the 3/4 clutch pack clearance, slide the gauge between the pressure plate and the top friction plate. This pressure plate is also selective and used to gain proper clutch pack clearance. Now let's air check those clutch packs using compressed air. You'll need to push air through these 3 holes between the sealing rings. Using a rubber tip on the blowgun, air check the 3/4 clutch pack. You want to hear a good solid thud when you hit this passage with air as the piston travels up the drum and tightens the 3/4 clutch pack. Next, use your thumb and cover the middle hole, then air check the overrun clutch pack, removing your thumb to allow the air to escape. Remember, you're looking for a good solid thud as the clutch pack tightens. Then air check the forward clutch pack. Releasing the trigger on the blowgun, the air should flow backwards through this same passage as the return spring moves the piston back. Replace all the Teflon sealing rings. Use a pick and remove the rings. You will need this special tool set to install and resize the turbine shaft rings. Using the expander side of this tool set, screw it down to the first ringland. Expand one of the sealing rings over the tool down to the first land. Now screw the tool up to the next ringland and install the next ring, and do so until the last ring is installed on the input shaft. Next, resize the rings with your fingers as close as possible to the input shaft. Next, lube all the rings with Vaseline or Transgel. Using the resizing tool, gently push it down over the input shaft and resize the rings. Now leave the resizing tool on the turbine shaft for now to help set the rings. And let's move on to the final and last subsection, the reverse input drum. First, lightly sand the drum where the 2/4 band rides. Use 80 grit sandpaper and cross hatch the drum until you break the glaze, giving it a rough look. Next, replace the lip seals on the piston. Just like the pistons on the main input drum, the lip part of the seal always faces down into the drum. Save the old seals, you may need them. This piston is not easy to install, especially if you're doing this for the first time. Now, since this is a difficult piston to install, lube both the inner and outer lip seals with either Transgel or Vaseline. Also, let's lube the inside of the drum where the seals ride. Install the piston, work both inner and outer seals, folding the lip part of the seal down between the piston and the drum. This piston does fit tight in the drum and can be a little fussy going down, so take your time with this and don't cut those new seals. If you do damage your new seals, you can always use the old ones as long as they're in good shape. And remember, never force the piston down. Next, install the return spring and the snap ring using the universal spring compressor. Now, don't confuse the low and reverse snap ring for the reverse input drum snap ring. They do look similar, but they're not. The reverse input drum snap ring is thicker, and the low and reverse snap ring is the thinner one. Next, install the cushion plate, cone side faces up. Then install a flat steel and alternate between frictions and steels. Install the pressure plate, beveled side up, then the snap ring. To check the clearance, slide the gauge between the snap ring and the pressure plate. To adjust the clearance, change the pressure plate. Technically, it's called the backing plate. Now turn the drum over and let's air check that clutch pack. Push air through this hole located here. The hole may be square or round. Remember, you're looking for a good solid thud as the piston tightens the clutch pack. Now let's install the reverse input drum over the main input drum. Remove the seal resizer. Install the total in-play thrust washer. Then install the Torrington bearing. Inner race facing up, outer race facing down. You will need to spline the clutch plates in the reverse drum to the splines here around the input drum. Be careful not to damage those new turbine shaft rings. Install the reverse drum over the shaft, lining the friction plates to the input drum. You'll know it's all the way down when the reverse drum rests on the Torrington bearing. Now that we are finished with all the subsections, let's reinstall them in the transmission case. Going to the rear of the case, let's replace that case bushing. First, knock out the old bushing. Install a new case bushing on a driver that fits the bushing. Now, going through the pump side of the transmission case, insert both the bushing and the driver. Drive the bushing down into the transmission case. Now drive it down just below this chamfered edge. Next, replace the 3 square cut O-rings on the low and reverse piston. Notice the lug located here on the back side of the piston. This lug sets in the reset area here in the bottom of the transmission case. Install the low and reverse piston, lining up the lug to the reset area in the case. To help install the piston, use the top ring gear and hub assembly as a tool and set it on top of the piston. Using a butt of a hammer, lightly strike the top of the hub, moving the piston down into the case. Next, install the return spring and the snap ring. Using the universal spring compressor. Next, install the Torrington bearing on the bottom ring gear hub. with the outer race facing up, and the inner race lays against the hub. Then install the Torrington bearing that fits on the bottom planetary, outer race up, the inner race lays against the base of the planetary. You will also need to paste this Torrington bearing on the bottom of the planetary. Then install the bottom ring gear into the transmission case. Next, install the bottom planetary into the ring gear, lining the teeth on the planetary gear to the teeth on the ring gear. Now to install the low and reverse clutch pack. Start with a wavy steel. Look for the identification V-notch cut in one of the lugs. You will also find this identification V-notch on all of the steels. Install the wave steel first with the V-notch facing towards the valve body section and bottom pan. Then install a flat steel. If one of the steels is thicker than the rest of the steels, it installs against the wave plate. Then install a friction plate or clutch plate, lining up the teeth on the friction plates to the bottom planetary, and alternate between steels and clutches. And you should end up with a friction plate on top. Next, let's reinstall the anti-clunk spring. Now the spring sets in this pocket here between the clutch pack and the case. Use Transgel or Vaseline and paste the spring in place. This is the way the spring positions itself in the case. Once you have the spring in place, install the low and reverse sprag and support assembly. Notice the area in the support that has no lugs. This cutout sets in the case located here. Next, install the support and sprag assembly into the case. Now gently push the support down until the anti-clunk spring snaps into place between the support and the transmission case. Rotate the inner race clockwise until it falls into place to the lugs on the bottom planetary. And when you have the support settled into the case, this is what it should look like when it's properly installed. Then install the snap ring. Now place the ends of the snap ring on the outside of the anti-clunk spring and this lug. Next, install the rear sun gear, splining the gear teeth to the bottom planetary gears. Install the black 4-tang washer with the 4 tabs facing down against the low and reverse sprags in a race. Next, install the sun gear shell. The splines located here fits over the rear sun gear. Install the metal 4-tang thrust washer, fitting the tabs of the washer to the 4 holes in the sun shell. Late model 4L60E transmissions will not have the metal washer, but a Torrington bearing that snaps to the top ring gear hub. Next, install the top ring gear and hub assembly. Set the Torrington bearing on the top planetary, inner race facing towards the planet body, outer race faces towards the top hub. Then insert the planetary into the ring gear. Now it's time to install that output shaft. Holding the gear set in place, slide the shaft through the rear of the transmission and up through the gear set. Then install the output shaft snap ring. Once you have the output shaft set, install the top sun gear with these splines facing away from the planetary gears. Skip this step if you're working on a model with the sun gear mounted to the input sprag. Now give those planetaries a small spin. They should rotate and spin freely without any bind-ups. Next, install the reverse and main input drum assembly. You will need to align the 3/4 clutch plates to the top ring gear, the reverse drum to the sun shell, and the input sprag to the sun gear, or the sun gear to the top planetary, depending on which style and year unit you're working on. You will know it's all the way down and seated properly when you can move the input drum up and down against the sun gear and the reverse input drum. Listen for a solid metal sound as you're moving the drum up and down. The reverse drum will drop about 1/16 to 3/8 of an inch below the deck where the pump mates to the case. Next, install a new 2/4 band. Notice the pilot hole for the anchor pin and the indentation in the strap where the 2/4 servo pin applies the band. Now when installing the band, be careful not to damage the braking material bonded to the band's surface area. Use a screwdriver and work the band around the drum. Next, insert the anchor pin. The small side of the pin fits through the case first and anchors the band. You will need to locate and set the pilot end of the band to the anchor pin hole in the case. Once you have the band set, slide the pin through the valve body side of the case and anchor the 2/4 band to the transmission case. Going back to the pump, remove the resizing tool. Next, install the pump to reverse drum plastic thrust washer. Notice on the back side of the washer the two legs. The two legs of the washer fit into the two holes located here. Using Transgel, paste the washer to the support. Next, using your 80/90 gear oil, lube the pump O-ring and stator rings, and the inside of the stator where the input shaft rings will ride. Lube the inside cylinder of the reverse drum to help ease the installation of those sealing rings. Lube the cavity of the case where the pump O-ring sets. Next, set the pump gasket in the case. Notice the flap here designed into the pump gasket. Now this flap is there to guard transmission fluid from splashing out of the breather cavity and out through the vent tube. Looking into the transmission case with the valve body side facing down, the flap in the gasket lays at the 11 o'clock position. Now set two of your guide pins into two of the pump bolt holes. It doesn't matter which holes, as long as the guide pins are across from each other. Then gently set the pump over the input shaft and into the pump cavity of the case, aligning the filter seal with the hole through the valve body side of the case. Now using your fist, ease the pump assembly down. Stop just before the pump O-ring enters into the case. Once you're sure that all 6 sealing rings have started into the cylinder of the reverse drum and the stator bore, then use a butt of a hammer and take the pump the rest of the way down, compressing the pump O-ring between the pump body and case. Then wipe off the excess oil. Then install all new O-rings on the pump bolts. Tighten and torque all the pump to case bolts to 18 foot-pounds. To check the total in-play setting, use a pair of vice grips and clamp them on the input shaft. Set the jaws of the pliers against the end of the stator and move the input shaft up and down. This is your total in-play. To measure that clearance, use a filler gauge and pick up on the input shaft. Slide the gauge in between the stator and the vice grips. Next, install the 2/4 servo assembly. Replace the O-ring on the inner housing. Most manufacturers will have them color-coded. The popular colors for the inner housing is either red or green. Install a new O-ring on the cover. Popular color is blue. Replace the scarf-cut Teflon sealing ring on the 4th apply piston. Notice how the two ends of the sealing ring butt together. Replace the 2 Teflon rings on the 2nd apply piston, ensuring the ends are set the same as on the 4th apply piston. Next, install the return spring. Then slide the inner housing over the 2nd apply piston with the webbing of the inner housing facing away from the 2nd apply piston. Lube the sealing ring and the inside of the bore. Insert the assembly into the bore. Next, install the 4th apply piston. Notice the tall and short stools on either side of the piston. The tall stool faces the inside of the servo cover. Insert both the piston and the cover as an assembly. Remember to first lube the O-ring. Tap the cover into the case. Then install that snap ring. The 2/4 servo is preset at the factory. However, the servo can be adjusted by using different pin lengths. The different pin lengths can be identified by grooves lathed into the tip of the pin. You can check the stroke of the servo by using your existing servo cover. Another good way is to use an old cover. Knocking the center out of it will give you a better view of the stroke of the servo pin. Either way, when you use this method, do not use the cover O-ring. Install the cover without the O-ring. Now, using your existing cover, install the cover with the snap ring in place. Using a screwdriver, push down on the center of the cover using the snap ring groove. Using our custom cover, retain it in place